Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me for a VR video. I'm doing a review today, so I'm looking at Vertigo in retrospective because I've finished playing it now. It's taken me a couple of weeks to sort of finish the game, but that's all done. If you want to see the actual playthrough, there's a series of videos which I'll link to this one, which will sort of cover my exploits throughout that. But in the meantime, please stay tuned and I shall tell you why I think Vertigo is a really good VR game. So, what's it all about? Well, without giving away too much of the plot, you're basically transported to another dimension where you find yourself deep underground in this mysterious scientific facility where you have to work your way towards the surface whilst battling various automatons and creatures along the way. Sounds familiar? Yeah, well, it sounds a little bit like the plot from Half-Life, or at least those are the parallels that I started to draw when I first started playing the game. However, having finished the game now, the gameplay and the story progression are vastly different. So any parallels drawn between Vertigo and that epic Valve title that I'm not going to mention ever again are purely subjective. So what about looking at Vertigo more objectively? It's a very well considered game for VR. It employs a large number of game mechanics which aren't revolutionary in the context of gaming, but work incredibly well for VR. So for example, consider climbing a ladder. If you were to climb a ladder in a non-VR game, you'd just walk into it, right? Your player would snap to the ladder, you'd ascend or descend accordingly. What about in a VR game though? Well, I've seen various methods for this, but most just involve you mysteriously arriving at the other end of the ladder with nothing happening in between. So what makes Vertigo different? It actually makes you physically climb, so you can use the hand controllers to grab each rung and move your body up or down. You can climb fast, you can climb slow, you can miss rungs, you can hold your position and shoot stuff, you can even fall off. The net result of all of this is that it just creates a really involving and immersive experience. So the physical involvement is where Vertigo stands out. VR is an exceptional media for involving more player movements, and some VR games just don't bother to employ such mechanics. But VR gives the player ladders, it gives it zip wires, little pockets upon your person to store your inventory, it gives you a lightsaber for deflecting lasers and stuff, you can snipe stuff, you can get shrunk, you can even slow down time to dispatch your foes with added style. So Vertigo is one of the most complete games that I've played in VR, by which I mean it's not over in 30 minutes, and it doesn't comprise content that amounts to little more than a tech demo. It's in fact quite the contrary. Vertigo feels very polished, both functionally and aesthetically. So, is the game challenging? Well, yes and no. In some respects it's actually fairly straightforward. The environments are designed like mazes rather than being laid out like a kind of functional, logical building. By this I mean we've got lots of corridors, lots of routes through different places, but most of which are blocked by either doors which you can't open or precipices or areas which you can't access, leaving generally only one route left for the player to travel down. Sometimes this route can be blocked with key locks, so you've got to go and find a key card. Again, not too challenging because I usually find the key cards are very close by. Other areas you can't proceed without using this I don't know what it's called, so I'm going to call it time juice. You kind of fill up your teleporter with this juice stuff, and it allows you to slow down time. And the game will usually provide this substance immediately preceding an area where you're going to need it. However, there were more challenges to have with boss fights, some of which were actually physically exhausting, and others just made me really think on my feet. I had to move fast, I had to think fast. As well as that, there's just lots of other challenging scenarios developing when you get into this sort of general combat with the various enemies throughout all the levels really. It made it very involved and exciting, and because you've got to move your body so much, it's a really good experience. So what about aesthetics? Well, the aesthetic value of the game is going to be highly subjective, but if you're interested in what I think, then what I found is that the shapes in terms of the geometry of the game and the colour schemes were all quite primary and quite sort of simplistic feeling, but then this was all bound together with a fantastic amount of really smooth, stylish effects, and I think the combination of the two really does deliver a rich experience and quite a unique looking game as well. It has this lovely cartoon aesthetic about it, but it's also fairly realistic as well in a fantasy sense. So what about the best bit? Well, for me, this has got to be the main method of locomotion. So Vertigo allows a smooth linear translation, which is just big words meaning no teleportation. And most games will have this mechanic, but usually it'll leave you feeling utterly wretched in no time, as in, puke-inducing wretchedness. The implementation here, however, does not have this effect, and it just really enhances the first-person experience. In fact, this is the only game I've known or been able to play that I can move around in a linear fashion without throwing up. So my worst experience with Vertigo has probably got to be a bug that I encountered later on in the game, which consisted of just a bright white light which was emanating from the centre of a table, and it completely filled my entire vision when I looked at it. This is particularly horrible in VR because you don't have any ability to ignore it other than to look in a different direction. Of course, you've got no other visual context outside of your headset, so this kind of bug is particularly horrible. But there's no doubt that this is a bug, so hopefully it won't be there for long. So would I recommend Vertigo? Absolutely yes. It's a really good fun game. It's got really great graphics, it's good sound, brilliant music, really good performance throughout my entire experience playing the game, and it didn't miss a beat performance wise. And on top of everything, it's just a really good VR experience. So I hope you enjoyed this little review of this very, very good game. If you're thinking about buying it, then I thoroughly recommend you do so for the aforementioned reasons. I'm going to call it a day. Thanks very much for watching. If you liked it, then give me a like. And if you didn't, then, well, bye-bye.